In September 1944, a quiet revolution began on the docks of California's Oakland Army Base.
As a transport ship discharged 47 Japanese women, captured during the fierce Battle for Saipan, an extraordinary psychological confrontation was set in motion. These women, ranging from trained nurses and dedicated teachers to essential civilian personnel, had served the Imperial Japanese Army. They disembarked, bracing for the barbaric cruelty propagated by their nation's wartime narrative. Tales of a primitive, resource-starved demon. Yet, what unfolded before them was a scene of bewildering prosperity. Cityscapes ablaze with electric light, vast expanses of meticulously paved highways, and architectural marvels that defied every expectation. The initial shock wasn't just at the enemy's perceived strength, but at a profound, unsettling paradox. Even as prisoners of war, the nascent glimpses of American life suggested a material abundance that demonstrably surpassed the pre-war reality for most civilians back home in Japan. Among them, a 23-year-old army nurse from Hiroshima, Michiko Tanaka, pressed her face against the transport's window, her whispered words reflecting a universal bewilderment. This cannot be the America we were told about. She was on the precipice of a revelation that would dismantle nearly everything she believed, not just about the enemy, but about her own world. Before we delve deeper into Michiko's unparalleled journey of discovery, please take a moment to like this video and share your initial thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us illuminate these vital, often overlooked chapters of history. Michiko's staunch patriotism had led her to volunteer in 1943. Fueled by a deep conviction that Japan was engaged in a righteous war against a technologically inferior and struggling Western nation. Japanese state propaganda had meticulously crafted an image of Americans living in rudimentary wooden dwellings, plagued by chronic food shortages, and operating with technology far behind Japan's own advancements. However, as her military convoy navigated the sprawling urban tapestry of San Francisco en route to the Crystal City internment camp in Texas, Michiko's observations systematically dismantled these carefully constructed falsehoods. Every thoroughfare pulsed with the movement of not only military vehicles, but an overwhelming proliferation of privately owned automobiles, a luxury almost unimaginable in wartime Japan. Towering skyscrapers, their architectural sophistication dwarfing anything Tokyo could offer, pierced the skyline under a canopy of vibrant neon advertising. Her fellow captives pointed out American women moving freely adorned in brightly colored dresses and luxurious fabrics, carrying leather handbags and exuding a confident demeanor that painted a stark contrast to the notion of a nation crippled by wartime austerity. The stark reality was undeniable. America was not merely enduring. It was thriving on a scale that bordered on the opulent, an almost unbearable sight for women who had known years of rationing and scarcity. This visual evidence offered the first, devastating proof that Japan had not only catastrophically underestimated America's military capabilities but had fundamentally misjudged the very societal fabric of its adversary. The subsequent 3-day train journey across the continent would further solidify this awakening, transforming into an involuntary educational tour that redefined industrial and social development for Michiko and her fellow captives. That 3-day train journey from California to Texas transformed into an involuntary nationwide educational tour for Michiko and her fellow captive, leaving them speechless at the scale of American industrial and social development. For 3 days, a continuous tapestry of endless farmlands, colossal factories, and bustling cities unfolded outside their windows. A persistent panorama of abundance that seemed utterly irreconcilable with their pre-war understanding of America.
"Look at those farms!"
exclaimed Sachiko Watanabe, a young woman who had served as a communications officer before her capture. The fields stretch beyond the horizon, and each farm has machines I've never seen. Michiko pressed her face against the window, watching enormous tractors working vast fields, whose scale made any Japanese farmland seem insignificant. Agricultural technology was decades ahead of Japanese farming methods, operating on a scale that was bewildering. Individual American farms appeared larger than entire Japanese villages. However, it was the cities that truly overturned their worldview. As the train traversed industrial behemoths like Chicago and St. Louis, the prisoners witnessed immense manufacturing facilities that unequivocally explained how America could sustain civilian prosperity, while simultaneously fighting a war on 2 continents. "Nurse Tanaka," Yuki whispered, maintaining a respectful formality even in their shared captivity. "If America possesses such colossal industrial capacity, how could our leaders have ever believed we could defeat them?" This question gnawed Michiko's mind as she observed factory after factory flash by the train window. Each plant dwarfed Japan's largest manufacturing facilities, and there appeared to be hundreds of them. Towering smokestacks belched plumes into the sky, signaling a level of production capable of satisfying both civilian and military demands concurrently. Unexpectedly, the American guards escorting the captives were remarkably amiable, offering food and answering questions about the passing scenery. Sergeant Mary Rodriguez, a Mexican-American woman from Texas, noticed Michiko's deep fascination with the landscape. "You seem very surprised by what you are seeing," Sergeant Rodriguez remarked in the measured English she had learned during her medical training. "America is different from what we were told." Michiko replied haltingly, her English heavily accented but intelligible. Sergeant Rodriguez smiled sympathetically. "Miss Tanaka, what were you told about America?" Michiko struggled to find the words to articulate the profound chasm between Japanese propaganda and American reality. "We were told Americans were poor, their cities were small, and their people lacked culture or technology." Sergeant Rodriguez nodded knowingly, a gesture that surprised me. "Propaganda tells people what the government wants them to believe, not the truth. You will learn more about the real America where you are going. The Crystal City detention camp in Texas, where the Japanese female prisoners of war would spend the remainder of the conflict, presented Michiko with its most shocking revelations. Even in captivity, her standard of living surpassed anything she had experienced as a free citizen in Japan. The camp comprised rows of neatly constructed houses, equipped with running water, electricity, and indoor plumbing. Amenities that were rare luxuries in rural Japan. Each family unit boasted a small refrigerator, electric lighting, and access to communal laundry facilities featuring modern washing machines. "This cannot be," Michiko murmured to herself as she explored the small apartment she would share with 3 other women. "Prisoners cannot live like this." Yet, the accommodations were merely the beginning. The camp housed a hospital equipped with modern medical devices that surpassed most Japanese civilian facilities. There was also a school, stocked with textbooks, laboratory equipment, and educational resources, superior to what many Japanese schools could offer. The camp even included a library, recreation facilities, and workshops where prisoners could acquire new skills. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the camp's medical director, conducted initial examinations of the new arrivals and was profoundly concerned by her findings. Many of the Japanese women exhibited signs of prolonged malnutrition, despite their previous service in the military or government. Their medical histories revealed a society grappling with severe resource shortages long before the war escalated. Ms. Tanaka, Dr. Mitchell communicated through a translator during Michiko's physical examination. "When was your last comprehensive medical checkup in Japan?" Michiko strained to recall. Perhaps 3 years ago. Even military personnel struggled to access medical services. Dr. Micho meticulously recorded her observations, which later contributed to intelligence reports on the state of the Japanese civilian population. "Here at Crystal City, you will receive regular medical care, dental treatment, and access to vitamins and medications that will help restore your health." The promise seemed too good to be true. In Japan, even military nurses like Michiko found it difficult to secure adequate medical supplies for their patients. The idea that prisoners in America would receive better health care than Japanese soldiers seemed unfathomable. But as the days turned into weeks, Michiko discovered that the impossible had become routine. 3 meals a day featured meat, vegetables, and dairy products. Hot showers offered unlimited water. Electric heaters warmed their quarters in winter, while electric fans provided relief in summer. Books, magazines, and educational programs designed to help prisoners understand American society were readily available. "Yuki," Michiko confided to her former colleague one evening in their brightly lit apartment, "I am beginning to understand why Japan will lose this war." Within weeks of her arrival in Crystal City, Michiko volunteered to work in the camp's medical facilities. where she discovered that American medical technology and practices were decades ahead of anything she had known in Japan. The camp hospital boasted X-ray machines, modern surgical equipment, and a supply of pharmaceuticals that far exceeded what her military hospital in Hiroshima could offer. Dr. Mitchell quickly recognized Michiko's medical training and arranged for her to assist in caring for both the Japanese prisoners of war and the German families also interned at the facility. Working alongside American medical personnel, Michiko was exposed daily to technological and social advancements that utterly contradicted everything Japanese propaganda had taught her. "Miss Tanaka," Dr. Mitchell explained during one of their rounds, "these sulfa drugs can cure infections that would have been fatal just a few years ago. American pharmaceutical companies develop treatments we are happy to share even with prisoners." Michiko held the small white pills, medical advancements she had never heard of. In Japan, such medications, if they existed at all, would have been reserved only for the highest-ranking officials. Here, they were routinely used to treat common infections among prisoners of war. However, medical revelations were only part of her education. The camp administration established educational programs designed to instruct prisoners about American democratic society, and Michiko found herself attending classes that challenged all her preconceived notions of American culture and values. Professor James Thompson, a retired university educator volunteering at the camp, led discussion groups on American history and government. "Miss Tanaka," he inquired during one session, "what were you taught in Japan about American society?" Michiko struggled to articulate beliefs that now seemed preposterous. "We were told Americans had no culture, that they were selfish individualists, with no loyalty to community, and that their government was weak and disorganized." Professor Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "And what have you observed here?" Indeed, Michiko looked around the classroom, observing American staff volunteering their time to educate enemy prisoners, seeing the systematic organization that provided better living conditions than most. Japanese civilians enjoyed and witnessing democratic processes that allowed prisoners to participate in camp management. "I have observed that we were lied to," Michiko said softly, the words feeling dangerous even in this secure environment. Professor Thompson's response was gentle yet profound. "Truth is always more complex than propaganda suggests. What you are learning here is that a society can be vastly different from the image its enemies portray." That evening, Michiko began to keep a diary which would later become a historical testament, the personal journey of a Japanese woman discovering that her enemy was not the primitive, barbaric society she had been taught to despise, but an advanced civilization, capable of treating even its prisoners with dignity and care. By Christmas 1944, Michiko's transformation was complete, but it brought with it a painful moral crisis that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The implication of having lived for 6 months as an American prisoner with a standard of living higher than any she had ever known as a free Japanese citizen was almost unbearable. The camp's Christmas celebration offered the final, devastating proof of American affluence and generosity. Despite being in the midst of a global war, the camp administration organized gift distributions for the children, provided a special meal of turkey and traditional American holiday foods, and arranged entertainment featuring both American and Japanese cultural elements. Michiko sat in the camp community center, watching American volunteers distribute gifts to Japanese children who were technically still enemy prisoners, tears streaming uncontrollably down her face. The generosity was immensely heartwarming, but it also represented the utter collapse of everything she had believed about the war and Japan's place in the world. "Nurse Tanaka," Yuki whispered, sitting beside her friend, "I received a letter from my family in Osaka today." Michiko turned to her colleague with concern. Letters from Japan had become increasingly scarce and desperate. "What news from home?" Yuki's voice trembled as she read. "My mother wrote that they are eating tree bark to survive. The bombing has destroyed most of the city." She asked if I was suffering horribly at the hands of American brutality. The irony was so profound it felt like physical pain. While their families starved amidst the ruins of Japanese cities, these prisoners lived in conditions more comfortable than anything they had known in peacetime Japan. While their mothers feared their daughters were suffering under American savagery, those daughters were receiving medical care, education, and treatment that demonstrated a level of civilization Japan had never achieved. "What will we tell them after the war?" Michiko asked. "How can we explain that America is completely different from what our government told us?" Yuki looked around the decorated community center, where Japanese prisoners and American guards were singing Christmas carols together. How can we explain that we lived better as American prisoners than we ever did as free Japanese citizens? That night, Michiko made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She began writing detailed letters to her family in Hiroshima, describing the truth about American society, the lies of Japanese propaganda, and the fact that Japan was fighting an unwinnable war against a civilization far more advanced and humane than its leaders had ever imagined. She knew these letters would never reach Japan during wartime, but she wrote them nonetheless, creating a record of discovery of how the enemy's kindness could be more devastating than any military defeat. In the spring of 1945, devastating news from Japan, conveyed through Red Cross communications, forced Michiko to confront the full horror of her homeland's situation. She learned that Hiroshima had been subjected to severe bombing raids, and the community where her family lived had been evacuated. Yet, more shocking than the destruction was the propaganda her mother was compelled to include in her letters. "My dearest daughter," her mother's letter read, "we hope you are enduring the torture and starvation that the evil Americans must be inflicting upon their prisoners. We are proud that you suffer for the Emperor rather than succumb to the enemy's kindness." Michiko read these words in the camp library. Surrounded by books her mother could only dream of owning, having just eaten a more nutritious breakfast than her family had enjoyed in years. The disconnect between her mother's assumption and her actual experience was so profound it made her feel physically ill. Dr. Mitch found her weeping over the letter and sat beside her, speaking with the same gentle manner Michiko had come to associate with all American authority figures. "Bad news from home," Dr. Michiko said in her increasingly fluent English. "My mother believes I am suffering torture and starvation. She would be proud of me for suffering for Japan, but I am not suffering. My life here is better than any I knew in Japan." Dr. Mitchell nodded understandingly. "Michiko, what your mother believes about America and what America truly is are two different things, just as what we believe about Japan and what Japan truly is may also be different." This conversation sparked a profound realization in Michiko. If Japanese propaganda was completely wrong about America, then perhaps American propaganda about Japan was equally distorted. Perhaps the truth was that both nations contained elements of good and evil, generosity and cruelty, advancement and primitivism. But one fact was undeniable. America possessed the industrial capacity and social organization to wage a global war while simultaneously treating its enemy prisoners better than Japan treated its own civilians. This was not about propaganda or perspective. It was a measurable, observable reality. Dr. Michiko asked, "What will become of us after the war?" Dr. Michiko smiled sadly. "You will, of course, be repatriated to Japan. You will go home to your families and try to rebuild your lives." But Michiko struggled to voice a thought that felt like treason. What if we don't want to go home? What if we want to stay in America and help build peace between our two countries? Dr. Mitchell looked at the young Japanese woman, utterly transformed by her prisoner of war experience, and realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. An enemy converted not by force or propaganda, but by simple human decency and the demonstration of a better way of life. In June 1945, Michiko was granted permission to participate in an extraordinary program that would forever change her life. The War Department authorized selected Japanese prisoners of war to work with American researchers to study Japanese society and culture, with the goal of preparing for post-war reconstruction and peaceful relations. Professor Helen Bradford, an anthropologist from Columbia University, arrived in Crystal City to interview Japanese posts about their pre-war lives and their observations of American society. When she met Michiko, she immediately recognized an unparalleled opportunity, a Japanese woman who could act as a bridge between two cultures, taught to despise each other. "Miss Tanaka," Professor Bradford explained during their first interview, "I am trying to understand how two civilized nations could come to hold such completely false perceptions of one another. Your dual perspective as a Japanese citizen and an American prisoner of war could help prevent future conflicts." Michiko found herself in a surreal position, explaining Japanese society to Americans who genuinely sought to understand it, while simultaneously struggling to comprehend why her own perceptions of America had been so utterly wrong. These conversations were intellectually challenging, delving into areas her medical training had never touched. Professor Bradford Michiko said during one particularly intense session. I think the problem is that both countries learned about each other from their respective governments, not from their people. Japanese leaders told us Americans were barbaric because they needed us to hate you. Perhaps American leaders told you Japanese were barbaric for the same reason. Professor Bradford took careful notes, realizing she was documenting insights that could reshape post-war diplomacy. What do you think would happen if ordinary Americans and ordinary Japanese could meet each other without their government's explanations? Michiko thought about her daily interactions in Crystal City with American staff and with prisoners from other nations, Germans, Italians, Japanese who shared living spaces, dining facilities, and educational programs with minimal conflict. I think we would find we have more in common than our leaders wanted us to believe, Michiko replied. Fear and hatred require distance. Understanding requires proximity. This conversation led to an unprecedented proposal. Professor Bradford suggested that certain Japanese prisoners of war, including Michiko, be allowed to remain in the United States after the war, serving as cultural ambassadors and researchers to help build the understanding necessary for lasting peace. This recommendation reached the highest levels of the American government, where officials were beginning to plan for post-war relations with Japan. The idea of former enemy prisoners serving as bridges between two societies was revolutionary, yet its logic was compelling. Michiko learned of this possibility through Dr. Michi, who had been consulting on the psychological and medical aspects of the program. You would be among the first Japanese women to live freely in American society, Dr. Mitchell explained. You could help both countries understand each other better. The offer represented everything Michiko had dreamed of since her discovery of the truth about American society, but it also meant abandoning her family, her homeland, and her identity as a Japanese woman. This choice would not only determine her future, but could also influence the future of Japanese-American relations. On August 6, 1945, the news of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima crackled over the radio in Crystal City, plunging all the Japanese prisoners into stunned silence and changing Michiko's fate, and that of all Japanese people, forever. For Michiko, the news was particularly devastating. Hiroshima was her hometown. Everything she loved resided within the blast radius. Dr. Mitchell found Michiko sitting alone in the camp hospital, her head in her hands, an expression in her eyes, as if the world had just ended. Michiko, I am so terribly sorry about the news from your home. Have you heard anything about your family? Michiko slowly shook her head. Dr. Mitchell, I understand now why you were so kind to us. You knew all along this would happen, didn't you? You knew America had weapons that could destroy entire cities. Dr. Mitchell sat beside her patient, colleague, and friend. Very few people knew about the atomic bomb, Michiko. But yes, I suppose some leaders knew the war would end in some terrible, unprecedented way. 3 days after the Hiroshima bombing, Nagasaki was also destroyed, providing a terrifying explanation for everything Michiko had observed during her captivity. American industrial capacity, technological advancement, and social organization had not only enabled them to treat prisoners kindly while fighting a global war, but it also empowered them to develop weapons that could end the war in days. Your kindness to us, Michiko said softly. Was it because you knew all along that we would need to live together after the war? Because you knew Japan would be utterly defeated? Dr. Micho considered the question carefully. I think the kindness was because we are human, and treating others humanely is what a civilized society does. But you are right. It will help us build peace together. On August 15th, as Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender, Michiko listened to the radio broadcast with an intermingling of relief and unbearable sorrow. The war was over, but her world had undergone a transformation she was still struggling to comprehend. What will you do now? Yuki asked as they listened to the surrender announcement. Will you accept Professor Bradford's offer to stay in America? Michiko looked around the camp, which had become her home, her school, and her laboratory for understanding a foreign culture. She thought of her family in Hiroshima, possibly dead or struggling in radioactive ruins. She thought of Japan, a nation that needed to rebuild not only its cities but its entire understanding of its place in the world. I think I must go home first, Michiko finally said. I need to see what has happened to my family and my country. But after that, she paused, trying to envision a future that seemed impossibly unpredictable. After that, I want to dedicate my life to building bridges between America and Japan, so that our children never again have to learn about each other through war. The decision felt right, even though it meant choosing the most difficult path. She would return to a destroyed homeland, armed with knowledge that would forever make her an outsider in her own country. In September 1945, as the repatriation of Japanese prisoners of war began, Michiko found herself preparing to return to a homeland she would barely recognize. Photographs and reports from Japan depicted cities reduced to rubble, a population facing starvation, and a society in complete disarray. Miss Tanaka, Professor Bradford, observed during their final interview, "You are returning to Japan with knowledge and a perspective that could be invaluable for its rebuilding. But it will not be easy to be someone who understands both cultures." Michiko had been contemplating this challenge for weeks. She would return as someone who had seen her homeland through foreign eyes, someone who had discovered that everything she had been taught about America was false, someone who had experienced a level of freedom and opportunity for women unheard of in traditional Japanese society. "Professor Bradford," she replied, "I think the difficulty will be in helping our people understand that losing the war may have saved us from an even worse fate. Continuing to live in the lies our government told us about the world." The camp administration made a generous gesture, arranging for departing prisoners to take books, educational materials, and medical supplies that might aid Japan's reconstruction. Michiko carefully packed her belongings, selecting items that could demonstrate American generosity and technological advancement to a people taught to hate and fear America. On the morning of her departure, Dr. Mitchell came to say goodbye, carrying a small leather medical bag filled with modern instruments and medications. "This is for your work in Japan," she explained, "and to remember that former enemies can also become friends." As the repatriation ship prepared to depart from San Francisco Bay, Michiko and her fellow former captives stood on the deck, looking back at the American coastline that had redefined their understanding of the world. The city skyline, which had amazed them upon their arrival, now felt like a symbol of the technological and social progress Japan would need to achieve if it was to rebuild successfully. "Nurse Tanaka," Yuki said, joining her at the rail, "do you think we will ever see America again?" Michiko thought of Professor Bradford's offer, of the work needed to prevent future conflicts, and of her own transformation from enemy prisoner to cultural bridge. "I think we will, Yuki. But next time, we will be friends, working for peace. Not prisoners, captured in wartime." The ship sailed toward Japan, carrying 47 women whose understanding of America, of the war, and of humanity had been utterly transformed by their prisoner of war experience. They were going home with knowledge that could rebuild not only Japan's cities, but also its relationship with the world. As the American coastline faded behind them, Michiko began to write in her diary a letter to her future self, documenting her transformation and outlining her plans for building understanding between two nations that had learned to see each other as human beings, not enemies. In October 1945, Michiko's ship docked in Yokohama, and she stepped onto Japanese soil for the first time in over a year, finding a nation unrecognizable. The bustling port city, she remembered, was now a landscape of rubble and ash, populated by hollow-eyed survivors in patched clothing, their faces gaunt from prolonged starvation. The most shocking discovery, however, was not the physical destruction, but the psychological devastation. The Japanese people she encountered seemed not merely broken by bombing and defeat, but by the complete collapse of everything they had believed about themselves and their place in the world. Nurse Tanaka, a repatriation center official, remarked while processing her return documents, "You look very well nourished. The Americans must not have treated you as harshly as we feared." Michiko struggled for the appropriate words. How could she explain that American treatment of prisoners surpassed what most Japanese civilians had endured during the war? How could she describe living conditions that exceeded Japan's peacetime standards? "Americans," she stated carefully, "treated us according to their own standards of civilized conduct." The official looked perplexed by her answer, as if the concept of civilized treatment for prisoners was incomprehensible. Michiko realized her first challenge would be to help her own people understand that their former enemies were also capable of humanity and generosity. Her journey to Hiroshima unveiled the full extent of the catastrophe that had befallen her home. The atomic bomb had not only obliterated buildings, it had vaporized an entire way of life. Her family's neighborhood was reduced to shadows burned onto concrete. Surviving relatives lived in makeshift shelters, tormented by radiation, sickness, and despair. Her mother, aged beyond her years and perhaps weighing only 90 pounds, embraced her daughter with tears and astonishment. "Michiko, you're back. We feared the Americans would kill all the captives after using their terrible weapon." Michiko looked at her mother's frail condition, then at the medical supplies she had brought from Crystal City: antibiotics, vitamins, and equipment representing technology Japan would not possess for years. "Mother, I have much to tell you about America, and about the world that our government never told us." In the weeks that followed, Michiko utilized her medical training to treat atomic bomb survivors, while carefully sharing her observations of American society. These conversations were difficult, and often painful, as she had to help people understand that their suffering was not inflicted by American brutality, but by Japanese leaders who had waged war against a nation they fundamentally misunderstood. "America is not our enemy," she declared to a group of survivors in a makeshift clinic. "If our children are to live in a world without this kind of war, America is what we must become." In the chaotic environment of occupied Japan, this statement was controversial, even dangerous. But Michiko was resolute. She would speak the truth, no matter the consequences. She had seen what lies and propaganda could do to a nation, and she was determined to help Japan build a future based on accurate understanding, not comforting illusions. By December 1945, Michiko had made her decision. She would assist with medical relief in Hiroshima for 2 years, then return to the United States to work with Professor Bradford on establishing educational programs to prevent future conflicts between nations that had learned to see each other as human beings, not enemies.